Dear Daniel, dear organizers and participants of the conference, I am happy to greet you at the 6th International Conference on Consciousness, Theater, Literature and the Arts. I wish you an interesting conference and enjoyable time in the great city of New York. Unfortunately, I am unable to attend the conference personally. However, thanks to Daniel, I have been given an opportunity to present my paper to you. The title of my presentation is Archetype Development in Narrative, Diachronic Study. The concept of an archetype that has become of significant importance for the literary analysis is usually defined as a statement, pattern of behavior, or prototype, which other statements, patterns of behavior and objects copy or emulate. As a Platonic philosophical idea, referring to pure forms, which embody the fundamental characteristics of a thing. A collective inherited unconscious idea, pattern of thought, image, etc., that is universally present in individual psyches, or a constantly recurring symbol or motive in literature, painting, or mythology. The origins of the archetypal hypothesis date back as far as Plato. Plato's ideas were mental forms that were imprinted in the soul before it was born into the world. They were a collective in the sense that they embodied the fundamental characteristics of a thing, rather than its specific peculiarities. In Jung's psychological framework, archetypes are innate, universal prototypes for ideas that may be used to interpret observations. In Spirit in Man, Art and Literature, Jung defined an archetype as a mythological motive. Archetypal literary criticism argues that archetypes determine the form and function of literary works, and that a text's meaning is shaped by cultural and psychological myths. Myths, considered to be the main source of archetypes, are generally defined as a traditional story or legend, offering an explanation of religious or supernatural phenomena, such as the gods, heroes, the many forces of nature, as collective dreams, or as the outcome of a kind of aesthetic play. Joseph Campbell described mythology as having a fourfold function within human society. First, the metaphysical function, awakening a sense of awe before the mystery of being. Second, the cosmological function, explaining the shape of the universe. Third, the sociological function, validate and support the existing social order. And fourth, the pedagogical function, guide the individual through the stages of life. Jung treated mythology as a reflection of common to all people collective unconscious, as an encyclopedia of archetypes. Mythological thinking has certain logical and psychological peculiarities, and represent the oldest form of symbolic language, by means of which man modeled, classified, and interpreted the outer world, society, and himself. Also, myth as a dominating form of thinking is characteristic of archaic cultures. At some level, or as a fragment, it may be present in various cultures, especially in literature and art, which are connected to it genetically, and share with it common features, for example, metaphorism. Most scholars agree that myths represent the earliest preserved to our time texts that reflect the ancient perception of the world, and serve the main source for development of folklore and fiction. The relation of myths and written fictional works may be viewed in two aspects, evolutionary and typologically. The evolutional aspect considers myths as a definite stage of consciousness, which historically preceded written literature. From this point of view, literature deals with disintegrated, relic forms of myths, and actively contributes to its decomposition. The typological aspect implied that mythology and written literature are opposed to each other as two different points of perception and description of the world, which coexist and relate, but manifest to a different degree in different epochs. In mythological texts, the events and their protagonists were gods or the first people, ancestors, etc. Having happened once, the events could be repeated in the constant rotation of life. On the other hand, mythological texts could be read from the point of view of everyday consciousness and included discretion of verbal thinking, the notions of the beginning and end, linearity and time organization. This engendered perception of personifications of one character as different ones. A single character of archaic myth turned in his transformations into a multitude of characters that were in complex relations, into a crowd of gods who received their professions, biographies, and relations. The introduction of a single plot language as the result of a mythological image splinter engendered fictional narration and gave birth to art and literature. The interaction of literature and myth acts as a constant flow of myth into literature, and indirectly through fine arts, rituals, folk festivities, religious mysteries, and in the later centuries, through mythological concepts, aesthetical and philosophical studies and folkloristics. The founder of New Mythologism, Richard Wagner, thought that it was via myth that people created arts, that myth is the poetry of life perception that has a universal character. Wagner's ideas about mythological art as the art of the future, as well as Friedrich Nietzsche's ideas about the life-saving role of mythologizing philosophy of life, explain the attempts to organize forms of cognition as mythopoetical, in opposition to analytical cognition of life. At the basis of New Mythologism is the cyclic concept of the world, or eternal rotation, according to Nietzsche. In the world that is governed by the principle of constant repetition, we can discern in any event of the present its past and future incarnations. Claude Lévi-Strauss, who considered myth to belong simultaneously to both Assyrian categories, langue and parole, distinguished myth themes, large constitutional units of a sentence level, in which definite functions are attributed to a certain character. As historical narration about the past, it is diachronic and not inverted in time. As a means of explaining present and future, it is synchronous and inverted in time. Because of its complexity and dual nature, the constitutional units of myth reveal their meaning not separately, but only in combinations or bundles of relations that have two dimensions, diachronic and synchronous. In this respect, Lévi-Strauss's analysis is very close to Propp's study of fairy tale, one of the genres that appear directly as the result of desacralization of myth. In archaic folklore, the difference between myth and fairy tales is hard to distinguish. Most scholars do not doubt generation of fairy tale from myth, as in archaic fairy tales, there is a close plot similarity between myth, rituals, and tribe customs. An important point in turning myths that had a ritual background and represented a part of rituals or commands to them into a fairy tale was disconnection of those myths from the ritual life of a tribe. When restrictions on telling myths were abolished and uninitiated listeners, such as children and women, were allowed to hear them, it provoked the teller to add his own imaginations to entertain the listeners, which inevitably led to weakening of faith in the stories he told. In such cases, the sacral part was extracted from myth, and family relations were stressed. The initial authenticity was replaced by relative trustworthiness, which led to a more conscious and free flow of imagination. Like a myth, a developed fairy tale has a single morphological structure, represented by a chain of losses, problems or insufficiencies of some values, and their acquisition that are joined together by the actions of a protagonist and represent the result of those actions. The trials of a protagonist of a fairy tale are comparable with the trials of initiation or matrimonial rituals in archaic society and its myths. As each person used to pass through initiation or other intermediate, for example, from one age group to another rituals, fairy tale, with its interest in the fate of a person, widely used mythological motives and motives connected with initiation rituals. These motives marked different stages in protagonist's life and became symbols of his heroism. A large contribution to the study of the structure of fairy tales and development of the theory of narratology was made by Vladimir Propp. In the book The Morphology of the Folk Tale, he analyzed a whole series of Russian folk tales and came to the conclusion that the same events were repeated in each story, creating a consistent framework. Prop identified fundamental components of Russian fairy folk tales and the relationship of these elements to each other. In this, Prop responded to Antirane, who focused on motives, it as repeated story elements, by arguing that Arne identified patterns but ignored the functions of these elements. For Prop, the appropriate unit of analysis was the function of dramatic personae, it as character plus action. Prop's structural model is based on the following criteria. 1. All fairy tales are constructed on the basis of one single string of actions or events called functions, which are significant actions or events for a plot construction. 2. The number of functions is 31 and they follow a strict order. 3. Tales are organized into sequences. Each sequence is composed of a selection of functions in the appropriate temporal order and constitutes a narrative episode. 4. Each function is susceptible of realization by different means or forms of function, by any of 7 characters between whom narrative functions are spread. The function shape, according to Levi-Strauss and syntagma, the forms a function can take in a given corpus, or allomorphs in Miletinsky's terminology, shape an open paradigm of options, which is subject to expansion. This allows to apply the model to other narratives than fairy tales, since further allomorphs could be found in alternative texts. Paradigmatic variation is envisaged by the model itself, whereas syntagmatic variation is not. The latter will, therefore, whenever it occurs, constitute the literary equivalent of a mutation. 31 functions in Russian folk tales bear a certain similarity to Joseph Campbell's monomyths, the theory that sees all mythic narratives as variations of a single great story. As a common pattern exists beneath the narrative elements of most great myths, regardless of their origin or time of creation. The central pattern is referred to as the hero's journey and can be classified using the various stages of a hero's pilgrimage through life, a process akin to character development. Another literary genre that developed from myth was legend. Legend, from the Latin legenda, what ought to be read, as a group of folklore texts, is united by an element of wonderful, fantastic, but perceived as something truthful that happened at the border of historical and mythological time, or at historical time. Legends may be connected with characters of either sacred or mundane history, without an element of miracle. However, the distinction is true for the cultures where the dominating tradition with the prevailing religion replaced early existing mythological systems, as in Christianity and Islam, and is more ambiguous in the traditions where the religion, for example Buddhism, has not abolished former mythological systems, or in polytheistic mythologies without any cardinal changes. The opposition of myth to other genres may be based on different features. To myth which is connected with legend on the basis of belief in its truthfulness and an element of miraculous that are of universal collective value, the legend may be opposed as the text belonging to a tribe or a family tradition. Indeed, the opposition of myth-legend is close to the opposition myth-fairy tale. In the cultures without change of religious systems, legend may be opposed to myth by its status, different degree of sacrality, and its connection to the cult. In continuing traditions, as well as in those with the change of mythological systems, legend is less sacred in comparison to myth, and describes later events than those in myth, telling about the event that took place after mythological time. In historical time, legend occupied the place between myth and historical description. However, the beginning of such legends has a definite starting point, for example, not earlier than the end of evangelic times. Such legends are correlated with fairy tales and indicate the similarity of the time of creation of these two genres. The development of narrative from myth with its stress on universal values and close connection with religion and its cults goes via fairy tales, with desacralization of initial texts, introduction of a freer mode of narration, addition of an element of imagination and shift of stress from collective to social or family values, or via legend of sacred or historical persons or events, with the stress on tribal or family values, to fictional works with even greater stress on personal fate, even in case of close connection of fictional works with initial mythological archetypes. Mythology has always been one of the main sources of themes for works of fiction. Mythological images were widely used during the period of classicism. Romanticist philosophy at the beginning of the 19th century stressed the importance of myth as the prototype of any creative work, looked at mythology as the necessary condition and source of material for any kind of poetry. Ritualism of Fraser and his followers, Cambridge group of researchers, suggested that the source of heroic epos, fairy tales, medieval novel, drama of the Renaissance, the works which used the language of biblical and Christian mythology, as well as naturalistic novels of the 19th century, were initiation or calendar rituals. T.S. Eliot called it a mythic method, a way of controlling, of ordering, of giving a shape and a significance to the immense panorama of futility and anarchy which is contemporary history. The above presented approach to diachronic development of narrative gives us a possibility to trace the development of archetype depiction on the basis of similar functions from myth through fairy tale or legend to works of fiction, with all varieties and similarities brought about by time, as well as by different perceptions of similar events by different authors. One of the plots frequently used by writers, and the most brilliant of them, was the story of Dr. Faustus. Faustus, the protagonist of a classic German legend, Johann Georg Faust, a magician, astrologer, and fortune-teller, is a scholar who is highly successful, yet ambitious and dissatisfied with his life. So he makes a pact with the devil, exchanging his soul and moral integrity for unlimited knowledge and worldly pleasures for a delimited term. The Faust of early books is irrevocably damned, because he prefers human to divine knowledge. The archetype can be traced back to Greek and biblical mythology that represent the foundation of European culture. The indication is given in the sung by chorus prologue to Christopher Marlowe's play, The Tragical History of Dr. Faustus, to the myth of Daedalus and his son Icarus in Greek mythology. The fruitful plot of scholarism graced that surely he was graced with doctor's name, excelling all whose sweet delight disputes in heavenly matters of theology, till swoln with cunning of a self-conceit, his waxen wings did mount above his reach, and melting heavens conspired his overthrow, for falling to a devilish exercise, and glutted now with learning's golden gifts, he surfeits upon cursed necromancy. Nothing so sweet as magic is to him, which he prefers before the chiefest bliss, and this the man that in his study sits. In Greek mythology, Daedalus, meaning clever worker, was a skillful craftsman and artist, inventor and innovator in many arts and father of Icarus and uncle of Perdix. According to Ovid, Daedalus was so proud of his achievement that he could not bear the idea of rival. His sister had placed her son under his charge to be taught the mechanical arts. He was an apt scholar and showed striking evidence of ingenuity. Daedalus was so envious of his nephew's accomplishments that he took an opportunity and caused him to fall from the Acropolis. Athena turned Perdix into a partridge, and Daedalus left Athens due to this. While in Crete, Daedalus created the plan for the Minoan palace of Knossos and constructed the labyrinth, which was a maze built for King Minos, who needed it to imprison his wife's son, the Minotaur. King Minos and Daedalus' understanding started deteriorating when Daedalus advised Princess Ariadne to give Theus the thread that helped him come out from the infamous labyrinth after killing the Minotaur. Minos was infuriated when found out about the betrayal and imprisoned Daedalus and his son to prevent the knowledge of his labyrinth from spreading to the public. Since Minos controlled the land and sea routes, Daedalus fabricated wings for himself and his young son. When both were prepared to flight, Daedalus warned Icarus not to fly too high, because the heat of the sun would melt the backs, nor too low, because the sea foam would soak the feathers. However, the boy, forgetting himself, began to soar upwards toward the sun. The blazing sun softened the backs, which held the feathers together, and they came off. Icarus fell into the sea and drowned. His father cried, bitterly lamenting his own arts, and called the land near the place where Icarus fell into the ocean Icaria, in memory of his child. The flight of Icarus symbolizes the limits determined to man, and voiced by Icarus' father, Daedalus. Not to fly too high, lest the sun would melt the backs that holds your wings, and not to fly too low, not to soak your wings in the sea foam. The golden middle to avoid the pride of trying to reach the height of God, and be cast to hell as the result, and humble, meaningless existence, lacking any striving and ambition. Afterwards, Daedalus arrived safely in Sicily, where he built a temple to Apollo and hung up his wings as an offering to the god. I have to apologize for having reminded you of the myth, which I am sure you know at least as well as I do, but remembering all the details is important for singling out the functions of the myth. The first function is quest for knowledge, excessive pride, lack of fulfillment. Second, jealousy of others' achievements. Third, inability to bear any restrictions and to control one's creative mind, and to think about the consequences of one's inventions. Fourth, downfall. In this context, Daedalus' son Icarus may be viewed as one aspect of his soul, his second self, that in spite of reason carries him higher than the boundaries defined for man, in the striving to achieve the height of the highest creator. This pride and unlimited ambition bring about his downfall. He is cast down from the height like biblical Lucifer. And fifth function, final reconciliation with God. That the theme is traced through three successive mythologies, Greek polytheistic, Hebrew monotheistic, and Christian, which give new dimensions to the treatment of the archetype and represent the base of allomorphs in alternative fictional texts. The German legend connects the initial archetype with such famous works of fiction as Christopher Marlowe's play The Tragical History of Dr. Faustus, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Faust, Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus, the life of the German composer Adrian Leverkühn, as told by a friend. We suggest that works about great ambitious scientists, such as The Life of Galileo by Bertolt Brecht, also belongs to the same archetype. In the legend of Dr. Faustus, the main functions are supplemented by such additional motives that were voiced by Christian interpretation of the Daedalus and Icarus' myth, but were inherent to it from the very beginning, as sin, redemption, and damnation. They are 1. Quest for knowledge, lack of fulfillment, excessive pride. 2. The second function, jealousy of others' achievements, is optional and may be omitted. The third function, inability to bear any restrictions and to control one's creative mind and think about the consequences of one's inventions, is modified by a wrong decision, selling one's soul in order to achieve supernatural knowledge. The downfall in Christian context is viewed as dividedness of human nature as the result of the wrong decision, that is followed by an additional function for one, striving to reintegrate one's soul. And 5. Final reconciliation with God is viewed as an option between salvation through striving, guided by love for one's neighbor, and damnation in case of its absence. Daedalus from Greek mythology may be compared with the one who tasted the apple of knowledge in the Garden of Eden after being tempted by the serpent, or a devil. In fictional works, the temptation is symbolized either by a demonic character, Mephistopheles, the powers of evil, or as trespassing of the principles of faith that shattered the foundation of society, like in the life of Galileo, leading to acquiring supernatural knowledge with blindness that follows, as symbol of inability to discern right from wrong, as in Marlowe's Faustus, Goethe's Faust, Brecht's Galileo, or Dementia of Leverkusen by Thomas Mann. And dividedness of protagonist's soul. Cummings mentions several myths of the soul dating back to ancient Greek philosophy. The doctrine of two souls states that the soul has two competing interests or drives. One drive is the rational, characterized by Faustus' scholarly and scientific work. The other drive is that of the imagination, or the spiritual drive. However, both of these drives, if out of balance with each other, do not bring about the kind of contentment that Faust hopes to achieve. Attempts to reintegrate one's soul are seen as striving to join the fallen half of soul with the ideal image of perfection, Helen, one of the most mysterious images whom both Faust and Faustus summon with the help of Mephistopheles. We can get a glimpse as to what Helen represents in Greek mythology in the book by Hans Jonas, The Gnostic Religion, that suggests that the beautiful Helen called up by Faustian characters was one the fallen thought of God, through whose rising mankind was to be saved. Her image was once her image as personification of woman's beauty and perfection may be treated with the view of the theory of Jung, who asserted that man's subconsciousness, or anima, is of feminine nature. We can draw here some parallels with the image of Beatrice in Dante's The Divine Comedy, who symbolized the purified essence of the poet's soul, a feminine aspect or anima of man's soul in which God resides, and the image in imitation to whom man was created. At the same time, it is the symbol of Mary, a symbol of transformed Eve. Transformed nature, saving man from the curse, is a possibility of man's transformation by getting closer to God and the sacred spirit that created this world to be perfect. In the Divine Comedy, it is the image of love that is in the center of the world. It's still point that makes the world go round, the love that moved the sun and the other stars. So in order to complete his soul, man has to join it with his ideal female half. This brings us to the last lines of Goethe's Faust, sung by the mystic choir. All of the transient is parable only. The insufficient here grows to reality. The indescribable here is done. Woman eternal beckons us on. The dividedness of Adrian's soul is reflected in disharmony between his physical and intellectual condition. He becomes increasingly corrupt of body and of mind, ridden by syphilis and insanity. While Leverkusen lives only for his music, he also exhibits strong impulses towards love, but they only appear to verify the terms of his Faustian pact, rejection of love for talent. His attraction to a female acquaintance begins a bizarre chain of events that culminates in the death of his friend, Rudi Schwertfeger. His love for his sister's 5-year-old son, Nepomuk, leads to the child's slow and excruciating death. Galileo felt the ambiguity of his position after having recanted the results of his life's work and beliefs. His pupils are disappointed with him. They needed a model to follow and saw a coward. His best pupil, Andrea, expresses his sorrow when he says, "Unhappy the land that breeds no hero, But Galileo replies, "No, Andrea, unhappy is the land that needs a hero." Scene 13. However, when old and broken, living under house arrest, he is visited by Andrea, Galileo gives him a book, Two New Sciences, containing all his scientific discoveries, asking him to smuggle it to Italy for dissemination abroad. The book that he believes will serve the progress of humanity. Scene 14. The outcome of the bold, challenging life and fate, final reconciliation with God, depends on either acceptance of the boundaries of human knowledge and humility, or self-destruction. Final salvation is seen as dependent on striving and love for humanity, as in Goethe's Faust, Brecht's Galileo, or self-annihilation by Marlowe's Faustus, who could not use his supernatural knowledge for anything reasonable and worthy, or Leverkusen by Mann, who denied the main principle of faith, love, the sin that contradicts Christian faith, as stated by Christ in the Gospels, as love of man for man and as love of man for God. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. St. Luke 10:27, and whose strivings were directed toward the void. Goethe's Faust, despite the fact that he loses the bet, viewed the land reclamation project as his greatest achievement, and is saved because he repents. He is active, a keynote struck in the prologue in heaven. Whoever strives in ceaseless toil, him we may grant redemption. Faustus' moment of happiness comes when he does good on behalf of humanity, not evil on behalf of his own self-gratifications. Angels chant the divine precept of Faustus' salvation. He has escaped this noble member of the spirit world from evil. Whoever strives in his endeavor, we can rescue from the devil, and if he has love within, granted from above, the sacred crowd will meet him with welcome and with love. Brecht's Galileo seems to be saved as well. After his recantation, he continues to work in secret on his discourse, and he repents his action. As he says in Scene 14, had I stood firm, the scientists could have developed something like the doctor's Hippocratic oath, a vow to use their knowledge exclusively for humankind's benefit. Thus the same functions help us to get a diachronic view of elaboration of an ancient archetype in successive religious traditions and fictional works based on their myths, joining the works of culture into a single dialogic intertext. Thank you for your attention. So.